Hey, I'm Jon.
And I'm Josh.
And this is Dungeon Brew, where we talk about all things homebrew.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
How do you start telling a story that you want to tell when you have no experience? And then it becomes obvious that you've got no experience during the course of the storytelling, right? I mean, you have a newer DM or somebody who is new to storytelling in general, but they're inspired. They really have this idea for this great game, this great story that they want to tell. They want their players involved in it. And then they sit down and they do all the prep that they could possibly do, and they bring the table together, and then it falls flat because they just don't have the experience for it. How do you get experience without experiencing it?
So when you are wanting to start homebrewing, I think there's really three areas I would advise people to look at. One is finding a thematic that you're excited about. Something that's kind of like your overarching concept or idea that you're putting into the campaign that keeps you motivated to keep coming back to the campaign, because you don't have a module to go back to and reference. So there's got to be something that you're continuously having this motivation to go and work on. The second thing is not to tweak a lot from the source material all at once. Start with small tweaks, small changes to any rules or modification that you're making when you're homebrewing, so that you're not essentially creating an entire soup from scratch. You're just removing or adding a couple of ingredients to change it up for the players. And the third thing I would say is regularly ask for feedback from your players. When you're first starting getting into homebrewing, you want to make sure that it's received well from your players. So you want to make sure that the players are okay with what you're doing, and that you're kind of open to criticism, constructive criticism, as well as, positives about what's working well with whatever it is that you're changing or introducing to the players.
So when you're talking about thematics, it sounds like something we should all be familiar with, but I think that it would be beneficial because you do everything you do for the most part, I think, is homebrew, or at least even the published material that you've run in the past, you change or you tweak significantly the same way that I do. So, but when you're talking about thematics, how do you bind a campaign to a theme in order to try and establish that? And can you talk about that more?
So there's a lot of different ways I think you can look at thematics. There's things where, you can have thematics are overarching, like setting, where it's grimdark or it's steampunk or it's something like that kind of gives it a different flavor, a different feel with what you're doing. Usually when I'm talking about thematics, though, it's beyond just the setting. It's more invested in the character themselves. Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest thematics that are out there is the hero's story. So I'm really big into knowing how my plot fits into the hero's story of each one of my characters, and finding ways to strengthen that throughout the story, whether it's through an NPC or a quest that they're on where there's something that's kind of reinforcing their story. One example of this is when we did our Hell campaign recently, and one of our players, is really looking for redemption and meeting this certain need of their god throughout the course of it. So I introduced things that were directly related to his hero story all throughout the campaign to what's the word I'm looking for? Rebind like that entire theme or that thematic of his hero's journey to be kept with that. I had another player in that same one who was trying to rescue a woman's child. So there would be little pieces that I would insert that weren't there before that were related directly to that child being saved, or the demon that had a pact with the woman that had endangered the child's life, etc. And I would make sure that those things were kind of breadcrumbed along the way throughout it to reinforce that thematic of the hero's story for his character. And so that's a big one that I like to use, because I think it's one of the main reasons we like to play role-playing games is to be the hero. And so I try to find out how each character is a hero and reinforce that thematic.
Right. So, and I think the other piece of that, because I played in that, it creates excitement on the part of the player to make sure they feel like they have a place in that world, right? Mm-hmm. it's easy when you're homebrewing to get excited about your own story, right? So I create my homebrew setting, my homebrew campaign, whatever it is, and I create NPCs that go in that. It's easy for a DM to make the mistake of making their own NPCs the heroes, to make their NPCs the focal points of whatever is going on in that world and in that story. But if you can make sure that you're, keeping that lens focused on specific players, and you may not get to every player every session. It may be something where it's like you focus on this player this session and this player this session. Character, sorry, not player, but whatever. But you get that focus on them, then it gives them that chance to feel connected to the world. Just like you were talking about with the character who was trying to save that woman's child. The child exists in the world you created. The woman exists in the world you created. And that character suddenly has a place in that world because he has a connection to both. And that's a huge piece of that player buy-in, of making sure that they feel connected to the world that you created. That it's not just, I created my world, you guys are in here, and I'm going to be the god who determines all things that exist. It is, you players are a part of the world, or your characters are a part of the world, and the characters influence the things that occur in this world by engaging with the people, places, and things that exist therein.
Absolutely. And a lot of that can be set up prior in like your session 0 in terms of what their motivations are or the type of thematic that you want to incorporate. We've done this before when we play evil campaigns. Right. And we create characters that are essentially trying to break down society or religion or the culture of the world or entire nations. And we get them on this same term where it's a very black and white, almost Tolkien-esque type of world where it's evil versus good or good versus evil. And we reinforce that thematic all the way through of that concept. But there's lots of things like that you can build. It's just understanding what is the theme that you're trying to highlight in this world and how can you reinforce it through the story that you're telling.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that, again, in terms of thematics, it is what does the theme in the world have to do with the story that's being told? So how can the story reinforce that? How can the characters participate in it? How can the rules reinforce it? All those things. And I do like what you were talking about when it comes to tweaking content in the world in terms of, and from context, I'm assuming you're talking about rules themselves. So not going through, your first time out the gates when you're trying to make these types of changes and saying, listen, I'm going to do all homebrew classes and I've got a new system for how I'm going to handle armor and weapons. And, everybody gets a piece of cheese that is integral to their soul. You don't try and change everything at once. You start tweaking with small pieces and see what the butterfly effect is.
Yeah.
See how it trickles down.
Don't try to create your entire magic system when you're out the gate.
Right.
It's taken us years to try to develop new magic systems for stuff. It can be very complicated to build another magic system and then put it into a 5th edition.
Well, trying to put it into any D&D system, like the Vancian system, is difficult to. It's difficult to tweak classes to make them fit in that, and we don't need to get focused on that bit right now. But yeah, in terms of changing magic in the system, it is definitely something where it's almost easier to go to a different system if you don't like the magic system for D&D than trying to change the D&D magic system, honestly.
Yeah, but small integral changes are important. And the third one, feedback, which I know I label it at the end, but it might be the most important out of all three, is being willing to hear feedback from your players. And there's a caveat to that in that you don't have to adjust your rule set or what you're doing based on that feedback. At the same point, don't stand firm and don't, say, nope, this is my rule, that's the way it's going to be, and you're going to have to live with it. But at the same time, I've had players that have had complaints about a way that something's being ran or the way that something's being done where they don't like it, but the other 5 players love it. Right. And so you don't have to take every suggestion or criticism as written law that you need to make a change, but you need to be open to it and not take it personally, and be okay with, people are going to have different opinions, different ideas about how things should be done. Be willing to be open and listen to it and see if there's any adjustments you can be made, but don't feel like you have to.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with middle ground, honestly. We have, however many people sitting around a table. DM, and you can have between 1 and, I think we played games with 12 players or something like that before. You have a bunch of people. You're not going to please everyone. And compromising and having conversations about those things are definitely important to creating a long-lasting campaign. There are plenty of campaigns that peter out because people can't agree, that people argue about things, whatever. And it happens. If the towel needs thrown in, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's better to have a conversation about it, try to make considerations, try to find that middle ground, and then, if push comes to shove, it happens.
Yeah, and you're going to run into it. There's no way you're not going to.
Exactly.
One of the things about homebrewing is that you either become the saint or the devil in the scenario, because it's your rules that they're following.
Right.
You're not going back to a pre-published book of predetermined set rules that everyone can just fall back on.
Right.
It's what the DM chose to change or adjust or modify in some way or another. And so it's sometimes hard to take it personally, or not take it personally when it's coming that route, but it's recognizing that everyone initially came to play the game to have fun. Everyone came to sit down and enjoy the game and play it. With this predetermined idea of what it was going to be. When you start tweaking with things as the homebrewer, the homebrew DM, and start messing with things a little bit, they sometimes will shift their frustration from the book to you, and you have to recognize that it's not really about you. So just not taking it personally and finding that middle ground.
Right. And I think that's a good point, as far as making sure that you are not too bound up. And this extends not only to your rules, but the campaign, to individual adventures, all those things. When you are creating things for your group to participate in, it's important to be able to look at it removed with a critical eye, to accept feedback and to recognize what works and what does not work. And that takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not always easy to run a game, to have invested hours, creating an adventure for the group, and then it doesn't go the way you wanted. They don't respond to it the way that you expected them to, or it could completely fall flat. You could end up with people upset about it, whatever the scenario. It's not easy to do that and then be able to let it roll off your back and take it the next, and start over next week when you're committed to a long-term homebrew campaign. Yeah, I do that. I've been homebrewing. I don't remember the last time I have tried to run. I think it's probably been 4 years now since the last time that I tried to run something straight from a book. And I didn't like it. I don't like doing it from the books. I do better when I homebrew. But I
started doing the Tyranny Dragons, and I shifted that after about a few months and just started homebrewing it.
Right. And I did Out of the Abyss and I ended up going, you know what? I'm not really feeling this campaign. I'm going to do something else. But and I really like the concept of Out of the Abyss. It's one of my favorite actual published games that Wizards of the Coast has done for 5th edition. It's just that I struggle with not doing homebrew. But anyway, but as far as the homebrew piece goes, you have to be prepared going in and going, all right, I'm going to run this session, and you just assume that there are things that are going to be wrong with it. There are things that you're going to have to tweak, that you're going to have to be prepared for a less than perfect session. And you can be pissed about it. Be pissed about it that day. Be pissed about it the night after. Be pissed about it for the next couple of days. But by the time you get to the next session, you have to be able to, gather yourself back up again, put something together for the next session, and just recognize the mistakes that you made that night in terms of, any number of things. Your NPCs weren't very good. Your plot wasn't very strong. You tried to put together this intriguing adventure, and the players were just like, well, why don't I just do this? And they just walk around the entire thing. That kind of stuff happens. It's happened to me countless times. And
so we walk around your adventure so much.
Right. It happens. But I don't, the thing is that I actually feel like I think I enjoy it. And there are times when, so a couple of weeks ago, you guys completely walked around the entire adventure for, the attack on Haven that you guys were supposed to experience. You guys avoided it entirely. I had invested hours into creating waves of enemies and everything else. I spent a lot of time preparing for that. But at the same time, it's like you guys took the correct actions. You made good rolls. You did all of the things necessary in order to be able to avoid that scenario. And I gave you experience for what you accomplished in that scenario. I didn't get upset about it. I didn't go, well, we're just going to have the fight anyway in the city because I prepared it. Those things, if it happens, it happens. And you just kind of move on with it and go, okay, so next time this happened, or the next time, I'm going to make changes to either, I'm not going to prep that if I don't think it's going to happen, or I'm going to try and provide other scenarios so that it changes what's going to happen, whatever. But
and that comes after time. I mean, it gets to a point that you recognize the fluidity of gameplay and how things can change and adjust, and you're able to take a step back. And, I've many times had an adventure prepped and people ignored it. I just take it and I put it back into my toolbox to pull out later when I might need it at another time, and not take it as a personal attack or as a waste of time. It was just the players decided to go a different route. I mean, even in my own campaign, what was it, about a month and a half ago, you guys showed up at a guy's doorstep, realized that he cast magic, which was against the law. It's like, we're going to fuck him up. They're like, what? Like, you guys are just coming back to, deliver some goods that you had taken from a package that was his, and it ended up turning into a battle that I was not prepped for.
Right.
Well, it was prepped. It was just prepped for maybe 4 or 5 months down the road. You guys we're going to mess him up. It's like, and you have to be willing to see all those different scenarios and plan for them and be able to respond to them. But
right, it's just a good thing you actually had the battle, all of the stuff prepped. So, I mean, this is way off. But the other thing is we, in recent years we do everything online, so it's a lot harder to. In some cases, it's a lot harder to prep, and it's a lot easier. So, it's really easy to just drag because we use Fantasy Grounds, it's easier to just drag a stat block or drag an NPC into the combat tracker. But sometimes it's like, if you're not prepared at all, you may not even really understand how they wanted them to be statted and that type of thing. So kind of having an idea there is a good idea too.
So I don't know that we're going to have enough time to really get into plot in this particular video, but I wanted to give you a chance too. Is there something that you would want to add for some advice for first comers that are wanting to homebrew DM? What are some things that maybe I missed out that you would say, here's something that you might consider?
So the main thing with it is that when it comes to homebrewing, and this is touched on a little bit by you, is that you have to talk to the players, but when you talk to them, you have to have a session zero. You have to have that initial conversation with everyone where you say, listen, these are the rules I'm intending to implement. These are the changes I'm intending to implement. These are the things that are going to be different from what a normal game looks like. And to some degree, that almost has to occur before the session zero even, because if you know the thematics of the game, the general plot, you know that you're going to be making major revisions to classes or rule systems, you may be sending some of that stuff out beforehand and saying, hey, are you guys okay with these changes? Are you okay? Are you going to be interested in playing? The game you're running right now, like we talked about, you have already changed all of the classes. There are no regular classes in that game. So before you even sat down to do a session zero with us, You basically said, are you guys going to be okay if I change all the classes and we just do everything from scratch? And people said, okay. And then when those classes got done, you sent them out to the players and said, hey, listen, these are the classes that are going to be available. Is everyone going to be okay with this? And once you got the affirmative, you moved on. Both of those things happened before we even made it to a session 0. And the session 0 is just as important as those pre-steps to say, listen, this is what I'm looking at doing. If you have any problems with the rules, you have any problems with the changes, let's discuss them now before we get into the game and they become a larger concern.
Dungeon Brew.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us today. Please check out some of the stuff we're doing. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, join us on our Discord, or go and watch us stream on Twitch where we're at 4 or 5 days a week. All the links are down below. We look forward to hearing from you.
Dungeon Brew.
Trying to record with the freaking sun in the window. All right. Oh, what the hell did you just do? It's a question for you. How do you do that?
Well,
I mean,
I think you.
I'm passionate about dogs, so I decided I want to run a furry campaign. And my players are not on board for this. They're not enjoying it, and they insult me in some way, or they say things that I don't particularly like.
Dungeon